Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm going to talk a bit about the changing landscape and how kind of media is changing. I'm going to talk a lot about how technology is changing our expectations of the world. But the general kind of theme I want to put out there is one of calmness. There's this weird assumption that the world is completely chaotic and crazy and accelerating. And a lot of people get paid a lot of money to make things sound really complicated, and they make things sound very different. And I'm hoping that this is quite a calm voice through some of the themes and the trends and the changes that matter. I think this is a time for celebration. I mean, by being in Australia and by being in this room, you're probably quite a lucky person. This is an incredibly nice country to live in. But it's also an incredible time to be alive, I think. Like, we're going through unprecedented change. We're going through vast amounts of kind of interesting changes that are making our jobs fascinating. And I think there is a tendency to look at this change and to be quite scared by it. But actually, I want you to realize quite how exciting this time is. It's a great time to work in advertising. It's a great time to work in media. But it's also just a great time to be alive. I know that sounds quite cheesy. And when you're English and you're positive, it feels quite uncomfortable. But I think it's really important that we just take a step back and we stop being so defensive, and we stop being so short-termist. And actually, we just look at with imagination and empathy, and we get really, really inspired by what's possible. Because there's a really fascinating link between technology and creativity and society. Now, this is a picture of a metal paint tube, which doesn't look particularly interesting. But prior to the invention of the metal paint tube, artists couldn't really paint outside. They had to use kind of pig's bladders, and it was extremely expensive and difficult, and the paint would dry up. But because of the invention of the metal paint tube, we're able to see the birth of the Impressionist movement. Like, something as simple and as boring as a metal paint tube gave birth to an entire artist movement that kind of changed the history of society. I think it also led to the first selfie as well, I'm not sure. Something as boring as the elevator as well. This is William Otis unveiling the new elevator, I think in the 1850s. And you may not realize it, but it was the elevator that made skyscrapers possible. It was elevators that unleashed the power of architects and engineers to build taller buildings than had ever been built before, which is an incredible accomplishment for society and for humanity. And it also led to the changing societal structure. Like, prior to the birth of the elevator, if you're extremely wealthy, you lived closest to the ground, and the upper floors of Parisian apartments, the penthouses were full of servants and kind of workers. And it completely upended that entire hierarchy, where all of a sudden wealthy people wanted to live in cities again, wealthy people wanted to live at the top of a building. And this isn't directly relevant for our industry, but I'm just aware that if the elevator can change society and architecture, and if the metal paint tube can change art, when we have things like the internet, it probably should be an incredible force for positive change. Like, we are in an environment now where we have abundant, pervasive, rapid, always-on, everywhere for free connectivity. That's an incredibly powerful thing to have in the world. We also have smartphones as well. You know, we can be connected to anything and anyone, anywhere on the go. And generally speaking, what we've seen, our industries do this. They've buried their head in the sand. Like, you can feel it in the body language of people. Like, I work with a lot of different clients in a lot of different sectors, whether that's banks, insurance, retail, automotive, fashion, luxury. It's a very, very unusual client that has body language towards the change that is particularly positive. Like, there is a prevailing feeling that somehow people want to just last as long as they can. They want to make as few changes as possible. It's extremely unusual to have particularly optimistic and progressive conversations about the change in the world. And I think that needs to change. Like, I genuinely think all of these changes in the world are incredibly exciting. They are deeply challenging for some industries, but they also are incredibly exciting. But I think in order to really make this progress, and in order to really get the most of this, we need to focus on what matters. Like, this is a time of abundant distraction. So this is the kind of journey for today. I'm going to introduce myself a tiny bit more. I'm going to talk a bit about the context of change in the environment right now. I'm going to talk about this pendulum that's swinging between the art and the science of advertising, the madman versus the mathsman, the kind of immeasurable versus the measurable. And I'm going to talk about how that's changed our industry. And then I'm going to talk about some thoughts for inspiration, hopefully. I'm going to try and make sense of these changes, and then there's the Q&A. Now, I became a person that somehow stands on stages because I got very frustrated with this industry. Like, I genuinely think there's an immense amount of crap that people say. You can write a piece saying that millennials are hard to reach. That's absolute nonsense. Like, people that live in cabins in woods that are preparing a government downfall, those people are hard to reach. Like, young people that spend their entire lives on their phone are the easiest people to reach the world has ever known. But yet, very few people seem prepared to stand up and say stuff like that. You can still write pieces saying that print is dead, or that radio is dying, or that TV is dying. It's just absolute crap. But somehow we're not in an environment where people challenge that. Even the very concept of millennials. Like stick your hand up if you've got a kid. Like, keep your hands up if you've got more than one kid. Now, I'm guessing those kids are probably quite different to each other. I'm guessing that you don't get them confused, that some of them like broccoli and some of them hate broccoli. So this idea that you have two kids that are very similar in age, probably, and that they're completely different, and yet we want to get 2.5 billion people in the world and put them together in one demographic. It doesn't make any sense at all. In fact, if there's one thing that you could say about millennials, it's that they don't have very much money. And yet, our entire industry is obsessed with reaching them, even though baby boomers have all of the money, but we kind of tend to ignore them. I'm a big fan of Scott Galloway, but there is this weird sense in the world that somehow brands are dying, that we don't need brands anymore. The same people that wake up and go to Starbucks and wear trendy jeans and trendy trousers, and they go to wanky hotels, these are the same people saying that brands are dying. It's just absolute crap. This idea that we're all going to be buying things through Alexa, I think, is complete nonsense. You get a lot of stats which are very dubious to me. There's this idea that 41% of adults use voice search daily. I just don't believe it. Like, if you on a daily basis use voice search, please raise your hand. OK. This is Sydney. Like, I saw on the map somewhere called Wagga Wagga. I've never been to Wagga Wagga. It just sounds really Australian. But I'm pretty sure if you go to Wagga Wagga, like, there are not 41% of people using voice search in Wagga Wagga. I know nothing about this place, so I'm not going to be rude about it. But my hunch is that that's not how the world is. We have expressions like big data. You know, 63% of small and medium businesses have deployed or plan to deploy big data projects. What is big data? Like, how big does data need to get before it's big data? Like, what's medium-sized data? Like, is there bigger data? Like, I know this is a bit facetious, but I'm just getting really annoyed with the amount of complete crap there is in the world. We have all these like focus groups, and we have findings like 1/3 of UK customers believe AR would help them narrow down choices when shopping. Could you imagine running a focus group with a normal person saying, would AR help you narrow down your choices when shopping? People have no fucking idea what AR is. They're just trying to get you to go away. They're just like, please, give me the voucher for Starbucks and go away. And yet, we root a lot of the thinking in our industry. We make a lot of decisions. We guide our thoughts with complete nonsense. So I got really irritated, so I started writing. I did this quote, which went viral. This is my sort of crappy claim to fame. And then I kind of ended up writing a book, which is a horrible thing to do. If anyone here is thinking about writing a book, don't write a book. It's just like being pregnant in your brain for about a year. It's horrible. But it has given me this confidence. And it's given me this confidence to provoke a debate. So I'm quite often invited to events to be irritating, but with a kind of nice style about myself. So if you feel deeply irritated throughout this presentation, it means I'm completely nailing it. In fact, if you sit there nodding your head, I'll be disappointed. So the world is changing faster than ever. If you look at adoption rates of new technology, generally speaking, every new technology gets adopted faster, whether it's the internet, whether it's desktops, whether it's tablets, whether it's smartphones, whether it's smart speakers, these lines become a lot steeper. We have amazing new things. We've got things like 3D printing. No one's really found out a use for it yet, but it's still very exciting. We've got robots. We've got drones. We've got cryptocurrencies and blockchain, which I don't know anything about, but Jared's going to talk about this later. We've got vending machines where you can buy likes. If you ever go to Russia and you're feeling lonely, just buy some friends on Facebook. I'm going there next week. We've got sneakers or trainers that you can order pizza from. So if you ever get hungry, you just press a button on the tongue, and pizza will come to you. So there is a lot of change in the world. But there's also quite a lot of things that have not changed. This is me a few days ago near Byron Bay. And there's still a man holding up a stop sign. And that's fine. But we do talk as if somehow AI is going to kill all of our jobs and that retail is dead. And we need to be aware that change does not happen particularly quickly. Like, there's no rational explanation for human beings still being employed to hold a stop sign. Like, change is not incredibly fast. This is the Sydney tram construction. This is not lightning fast. This is not the sweeping force of change for the world. I've been to Sydney every year for the last 4 years, and I'm pretty sure they're still doing the same stuff they were 4 years ago. I'm glad you like that, because you get a bit worried when you do locally relevant stuff and you've got no idea what you're talking about. If you think about your morning this morning and you compare it with 20 years ago, like, it's fun to think of the things that are different. Like, did you wake up in your house and like a robot got your kids ready for school? Probably not. Did you eat cereal that was in like a 3D printed bowl? Probably not. Was there like a drone delivering a sort of T-shirt to your friend across the city? No. Like, there will have been some fundamental changes. Like, some of you will have come here in an Uber. Some of you may have sold your car because you can use Ubers a lot. But generally speaking, if you actually look at the world, there's a lot of things that are quite similar in it. So I have these kind of hypotheses, which I'm starting to test as I speak. And one is that a lot of the things that are the same we tend to ignore because it's not particularly exciting. We get blinded by distractions. Like, we're obsessed with the fact that VR will change advertising, or that digitally vertical native brands are going to kill your brand, or that brands don't matter. And actually, most of the time, these changes aren't particularly significant. And many of the things that really, really do matter, I think we don't actually notice because they're a bit boring or they're intangible. Like, actually, software tends to not really be talked about that much because you can't really feel it. It doesn't make good B-roll in a in the news cycle. But it's actually things like software that tend to change the world a lot more. Like, if you actually look at things like the Jetsons, like, the prediction is that we'd all be in kind of flying cars, and that we'd be wearing silver clothes, and that we'd live in houses that have got massive glass windows. Like, actually, the really big changes that have happened to us are always software. It's always that we don't need to go to a retailer anymore. It's always that we can talk to other people across the world. It's always things that are quite invisible. As a result, you don't get headlines like this. Like, these are not real headlines because you don't get published if you write boring pieces. If you write the future of retail is just really good customer service, no one's going to pick that up. There's no panel at Advertising Week, which is why building great brands is kind of the same as before. I mean, I'd love to go to that one. I want Casey Neistat, whoever he really is. I'd like him to be there talking about branding. Again, Mark Ritson. There's no nuance in debate. Like, I love Mark, but everything has to be like very extreme. There's no influencer marketing is kind of OK, but not for everything. So I'd like to try and just have a slightly more somber and realistic kind of conversation about change in the world. And part of that is the context for this change. So there's 3 little things that I want to set up this session with. The first one is, like, we really have to understand that we live in a digital world. And I know this sounds quite cliched and quite boring, but I don't think we've got it yet. Like, I've been going around the world talking for about 5 or 6 years now, and I still don't really think that people understand fundamentally quite how omnipresent and how ingrained in our culture digital stuff is. Because, like, you're all about the same age as me or a bit older. And like, this is how we think of the internet. Like, we do think of it as this activity that we do. We do still somehow think of it as this place you go or this decision that you make. Like, we remember when you wanted to get on the internet, you had to unplug someone else's phone, plug something in, get this little dialing up thing, get the scratchy music, and you would do what you had to do, and then you'd get off the internet. And then later on that day, if you'd realized you'd forgotten to do something, it was kind of annoying because you had to go back to the internet. That's not how people today think. You know, I really like this tweet. Most of my presentations are just other people's tweets stolen. But 1997, I'm surfing the web. 2007, I'm browsing the web. 2017, there's no verb for my useless constant state of being. Like, this is the reality of the internet today. I also like this one. Most millennials, again, don't like that word, but spend more time offline and on. For them, it's the real world, and everything else is a distraction. Now, we don't think this way in business. Like, we still have like global heads of e-commerce. We still have digital strategies. We still have digital departments. We kind of bolt on the digital stuff in addition to the rest of what our industry does. We still, especially within advertising, have a completely separate team that thinks about digital stuff. And that's not how the modern world works. Like, if you use Tinder, you do not do online dating. You just do dating. And the internet is a part of the background to making that happen. If you get in an Uber, you're not doing a digital car sharing service. You're just getting somewhere. So whether it's e-commerce from eBay, whether it's things like streaming, whether it's things like mobile banking, the reality is that people now just behave in a way where the internet is background to everything they do and completely irrelevant. There are so many reports that say things like, when people research a car, they will do some of it online and some of it offline. And we keep on assuming that there are these lines that don't actually really exist to people. For me, it's a bit like electricity. Like, if someone said to you, do you use electricity to research a car? You'd be like, well, I kind of do, but that's kind of not the point. Like, if someone said to you, how many hours a day do you spend with electricity? You wouldn't really be able to sort of think about it. So I'd love us to get to a point where we just realize that the internet is just a fundamental aspect to the modern world, and it's not remotely interesting to everyone, to anyone, but it's also incredibly profound and exciting. Now, I think we're kind of in this mid-stage. Like, there will be an era where we've made sense of everything, but we're not there yet. So I call this the mid-digital age. Now, normally, when you look at how technology arrives, and by this I mean profound technology. I mean things like the fire or wheels or electricity or steam power. Like, very, very profound technology normally happens in 3 stages. There's this time before it where we've got to grips with the technology before, where things make sense, where life is simple. So if you remember this in media terms, you know, the age when we had CD players and radio cassette players and newspapers and magazines and we'd watch TV, every device that you had did one thing extremely well. There was no confusion about it. There was no kind of like fake news really in that era. You weren't waiting for a hardware update before you could start watching TV. Like, everything just kind of worked. Then when this new technology arrives, you have this complete period of chaos where no one really knows what to do, where everyone's kind of rapidly trying to make sense of it, where there are lots of business models that fail. If you look at things like electricity, when that first arrived in the world, there were the battles between AC versus DC. Lots of people made lots and lots of mistakes. And then there's a period afterwards where it kind of makes sense again, where there is simplicity and where people rebuild systems around that new technology. And I think we're in that kind of mid-stage. Like, we're at that stage where, generally speaking, things are probably going to get more complex before they get more simple. But at the end of this process, things will get more simple again. But we have to kind of live with this complexity right now. So if you're going to watch TV, you probably have to think about which remote control you use before you think about the show that you want to watch. Like, it's a very messy choice architecture that we have in TV. Like, there will be a period of time where you'll just yell to your TV that you want to watch Breaking Bad, and it doesn't really matter how it comes to you. It will just suddenly start appearing on the TV screen. But we're not there yet. At the moment, we have to think, is that the thing on the Apple TV? Which app do I need to use to watch it? Like, how do I make sure this is the correct episode? It's quite complex. You see this chaos everywhere. This is a screen the other day in a food institution in New York, where because there are so many food delivery apps, they have this kind of array of screens that they have to check to make sure that they're able to track every order. It's just very, very messy. We see it with things like ad blocking. Ad blocking is the realization that there are fundamental creaks and structural problems with the advertising industry that we haven't solved yet. Like, we're in this very messy situation when we haven't quite figured out how to monetize content in a way that's fair for everyone. And it's just messy everywhere. This is an oven where you have to check yes for a privacy policy before you can start cooking. Like, if you actually think about how often you have to think about technology, like, it's incredible how many times you don't have reception, or how many times your phone's running out of power, or how many times the film doesn't quite play in the PowerPoint and you're not too sure why. Like, we are in this amazingly complicated period, but things will get more simple. And what we've tended to do at the moment is we've blindly taken things that we've done before, and we've kind of repurposed them for the digital age without thinking about it. So this is someone in America who had to buy a car, and as part of that process, they had to tick off the "I'm not a robot" box. And it's kind of like, it's not the most profound demonstration ever, but it's amazing how often we go through the process of pulling what we've done before through a digital frame without thinking about it. So I don't know if Jeff and Keith are here today, but this is an ad for property where it says, "Click here to find out more." So I'm not being mean. It's just a good example of how we don't rethink things. This is America. America's banking is stuck in the 1970s. We still use checks. So the best way to send money to someone in America is to write them a check. Then they take a photograph of that check. And then someone in India turns that check into a digital transaction. This is a great representation of the way that we add on technology to stuff rather than rebuilding around it. I'm a big toilet roll fan. And if you go to Amazon and you search toilet rolls, it's just weird to me that they just decide to take photographs of toilet rolls. Like, what they've done is they've taken the behavior of what happens when you go to a store, you see toilet roll, and they've just kind of replicated that behavior onto the internet. It doesn't make any sense. If you're going to rethink retail from scratch, you wouldn't just have photographs of products. You'd have like descriptive icons. You'd have like different brand work. You'd actually kind of present the information in a much more clear way. So I think the future will be amazing. But we have to really rethink. Like, there is this tendency to take what we've done before and add on the smallest amount of change that we have to in order to still appear contemporary. And actually, the really, really significant leapfrogs in life happen when people completely rethink around these new possibilities. So think about changing consumer behaviors. Think about new expectations. Like, really, really rebuild around the power of the new. And the final one here is overload. Like, I think we tend to forget this. But most people, most of the time, are paralyzed by content. They're paralyzed by decisions they have to make. If you add up all of the time that people spend per day washing, cleaning, reading, watching newspaper, watching TV, et cetera, it comes up to over 31.5 hours a day. So the only way we can possibly deal with that much media and that much activity in our life is to multitask. And I think we forget that. We kind of forget that most people, most of the time, are trying to remove distractions from their life. If you look at the number of movies made per year, if you look at the number of original TV scripted shows per year, the number of books published per year, not only do these lines go up, but they go up in a quasi-hyperbolic way. Like, these are serious, serious amounts of content that we're making. The same is true for video hours uploaded. The same is true for photographs, the number of social posts. Like, the context for the way that people make decisions today is one of complete abundance and complete overwhelm. They're completely overwhelmed by everything. We're also seeing that with products made as well. Like, the entire world of venture capital, this need that companies have to innovate more strongly than ever, it just means that there's brand new products being launched at like a faster than ever rate. So I think we have to be really mindful of that. We have to be really mindful that people do not get bored anymore. Like, people do not look around trying to find things to do. Instead, they spend most of their life trying to get rid of stuff. I quite like this. This isn't particularly profound, but it's just quite funny. Useful abbreviations for the time-pressed online reader. I like red headline posted angry comments. I think that's how most people behave these days. Very short, still didn't read. So nobody is bored anymore, but it does mean that brands matter more than ever before. So whether it's helping in the way that we choose what to wear, whether it's helping decide what media to read, like the role of brands is our primary way to navigate and to make sense of this world of abundance. So the second chapter here is this pendulum. Somehow, our industry is dissected between the traditional media world and the new media world, or interactive, or digital, or whatever you want to call it. And there's this cultural battle, I think, between the madmen of the past and the mathmen of the future. Now, if I ask you what your favorite ad is today, like someone shout it out, what's your favorite ad you've ever seen? What?
It's an Australian ad,
Bonds hunting. That's the most Australian thing I've ever heard. What sort of ad is it?
There's an exhibitor
Yeah.
that's following a trail of ads of a woman's body.
Oh, sounds quite good. And is it like a print ad? Is it a TV ad?
Television.
Yeah, so it's always a TV ad. You can do this in 1,000 times a year, and it's always a TV ad. And if you say to people what's the favorite ever digital ad, like no one can ever remember a single one. Like if I ever ask anyone to name a good internet-delivered ad they've ever seen, I've never had a reply. And that's quite interesting. I think, if you actually look back at how this happened, because I was working in a creative agency in 2001, like we never really took it seriously. Like the amounts of money were so small that we never gave it to a proper production team. No creative ever won an award at Cannes for doing a great digital ad. Like we never bothered to apply strategy. We never bothered to apply creativity. We just sort of dealt with it in the quickest way we could. And it's led to this horrible vicious circle. I'm sorry about the art direction on this slide. But basically, online media was quite cheap. So it wasn't really worth our time, because in theory, production cost should be a percentage of media cost. So we made pretty crappy ads because we didn't really know what we were doing. It's no surprise there that they didn't perform particularly well. And therefore, no one really wanted to pay that much for them, so the price deflated. And then in order to cope with that, media publishers had to create more inventory because they weren't getting as much money as they needed, which led to deflationary pressure again. And this circle carried on and on and on. And actually, the weird thing that happened is as the internet became more important, we went to it more, and we spent more time on it, which actually just created even more inventory, which meant that inventory tended to infinity, which meant that the price tended to zero. And we've just been stuck in this horrible, horrible spiral of decline, which we've never really got out of. And we made these horrible assumptions. We made this assumption that because you could measure it, that you should. And then we decided the only thing that mattered in online media were those stats. It was the click-through rate, et cetera. So we kind of optimized insanely against criteria that we could measure that didn't really matter that much. And anything that you couldn't measure, you actually didn't bother to measure at all. You didn't care about. Now, before the internet, I bought lots and lots of things despite never clicking on an ad. And I think somehow, within the world of digital media, we assume that unless you click on an ad, it's been a complete failure. And that's a very strange state of affairs. The second assumption that we made is because we could target it, we should. And the more precise the targeting, the better. That's a very strange assumption that we made. The third is as time spent on digital screens increases, the only reason you shouldn't spend money there is from ignorance. So every single brand had to be online. Otherwise, they felt like somehow they were missing a trick, or they felt quite vulnerable. And all of these strange assumptions have created this horrible, horrible marketplace at the moment where no one really benefits from it. As a customer or a consumer or a human being, you do not enjoy the online browsing experience. As a brand, you do not have the control that you need. You don't get the results that you want. And as a media owner, the CPMs that you get are certainly not great. It's led to this horrible, horrible situation. And I think we really need to get out of it. We really need to stop this sort of cultural divide that we have between the old world and the new world. We really need to get a more sensible place for the pendulum where we're kind of learning from the past and we're learning from the current and we're creating a sort of best in both environment where creativity matters, where results matter, but we shouldn't just be kind of praying at one church or the other. And I think it's going to be important for us in this industry to build bridges between those two worlds, to understand that there are some wonderful things that you can do that you can't measure. That actually this relentless race to optimization and this relentless chase that we have towards efficiency is actually not producing great results. We also have to be really careful about short-termism as well. Like, it's very, very hard to get people to build brands in this current advertising environment. And this tension between the two worlds, I think, then created this weird environment that we're in now, where somehow people assume that advertising doesn't really work anymore. Like, we assume that digital stuff doesn't work, and that traditional stuff is old, and people don't watch TV anymore, and they don't buy magazines anymore, and that's nonsense. And we have this weird environment where we assume that somehow advertising is broken. And it's just not true at all. But people look at charts like this. I don't know if you can read it, but this is a chart that shows that people enjoy recommendations from their friends, and the best way to market a product is to get people to recommend it to each other. And this chart also shows that people don't trust advertising. And I don't think it's very true, but it's led to this strange situation we're in at the moment, where everyone feels like they need to do things like influencer marketing. We also have content marketing. This video is a good description of content marketing. It doesn't want the macaroni.
Sophia. Sophia, abo. Ah.
It's not an ad for Kit Kat, it's just a good metaphor. We'll give them stuff that we want, and then we'll sort of throw in a brand at the last minute and hope they don't notice. And content marketing is amazing, but we need to be aware that unless you can remember the brand that actually gave you the content, it's been a waste of time. There's way too many clients for me that focus on how well the content performed rather than how well people can associate that content with the brand that actually paid for it. We see the rise of personalization and micro-targeting as well. And again, because we do have all this data, we tend to assume that we can be more precise than we probably can. You know, like, I'm a big ball bearing fan, but even I don't expect to get ads served for ball bearings when I'm on a site like Reuters. Like, there's this weird sort of relentless chase that we have towards performance marketing. We've got a lot of strange maths when it comes to attribution as well, where you can target someone effectively for about 20 years. You can spend 20 years persuading them that a BMW is a great vehicle to buy. And then the day that they buy a BMW, if they just happen to have been served a mobile ad, all of the attribution will go to that particular ad, and people think they need to double down on that form of advertising. It's a very strange environment we're in at the moment, where we're measuring the wrong things, we're optimizing towards the wrong things, and we haven't sort of built this general, calm, mature, sophisticated form of measurement where we take into account all of these different things. Part of this means that we're therefore throwing more and more money closer to the point of purchase, not because it creates more success, but because it's the place where we can capture the success most efficiently. Like, it's very hard to prove the return on investment from a TV ad or from a print ad. But if you can stick some money into Amazon and someone clicks on it, it's very easy to sort of somehow assume that it was that ad that made it happen. And I think it's quite strange. It worries me. In fact, I'm aware that a lot of the things that used to work really well, and a lot of the tenets that we had in this industry, and a lot of the tactics that we used and the techniques that we loved, like, they're still every bit as relevant today as they've always been. Like, the power of great storytelling, the power of really strong brand ideals are always going to work. And I think the latest success, stroke controversy, stroke media attention from the Nike ad is a good example of how powerful those techniques can still be. So I've got a couple minutes now just to talk about future inspiration. We are in an environment where slowly all screens will become digital. We've somehow assumed that life is becoming more fragmented and more complex than ever. And actually, if anything, it's getting more simple. Like, the internet is becoming the primary pipe for most of the media in our life. Like, newspapers will always have a role, and they will always be effective. Outdoor will always be interesting. But generally speaking, other forms of media will just become digitally served. Whether it's radio, whether it's TV, everything will just become data that's in a pipe. And the devices themselves are becoming more similar. So this notion of TV versus radio versus movies, versus laptops versus desktops versus tablets, it's easier just to think of them as black mirrors that are connected to the internet that allow stories to be told. We're seeing lots of blurred lines. Like, we know that these people are watching TV. That person's probably watching TV, and we're not really sure what this person's doing. But if you have to define today what TV actually means, it's pretty much impossible to define it. Like, is the defining characteristic of TV something you watch on a TV screen? Is it something that comes to you through the electromagnetic spectrum? Is it something that's of good quality? Like, we don't really know what TV is. And that's happening in other forms of media as well. Like, as magazines become more printy, what makes a magazine versus a book is starting to change. Books versus ebooks. As TV shows become more greatly produced and longer, the gulf between TV and movies starts to blur. So increasingly, we have to be aware that a lot of the devices that we've used to delineate the marketing environment are increasingly unhelpful. Digital versus traditional, TV versus radio, all of these lines become slightly less helpful. Instead, we probably just need to focus about what's possible. Like, rather than these really boring discussions about how an ad gets to you, it's much better to think about what you can now do with it. And as screens become digital, and as they become interactive, and as they become very personal, we're now able to make every single screen in the world a shoppable screen. We're also starting to see really interesting bridges between the real world and the non-real world. So whether it's things like QR codes, whether it's things like AR apps. On the left, this is a supermarket app where you can scan the chicken. It tells you what you should buy, and it kind of lays a path around the store to where you can buy that product. On the right, it's a way to hold up loyalty cards to your phone, and it pulls through live data about how many points you've got. Now, I don't find these particularly commercially interesting, but as a demonstration of how augmented reality and how this technology can provide augmentation to how we live our life, and how we need to see the world as this kind of construct of both reality and the internet at the same time, they're quite powerful ways to make that point. I think voice will be interesting as a bridge between these two worlds. Like, you can imagine quite soon shouting out to your TV ad as the TV ad is being displayed, Alexa, buy me the product that's in this ad, and it'll add it to your shopping list. We're going to see new concepts like privacy trading. Like, so far, we've presumed that the way to have a debate about privacy is to not have a debate. It's to kind of take as much information as we can from people, personalize ads as much as we can to people, and then hope that people don't notice. If we actually change the nature of the conversation, and if we're explicit about what data we're using and how we're going to give something in return, then I actually think that we can enter a really interesting new era in advertising where we help people more, where we use their data to give them better products and services, where we use their data to give them special offers. And I think that's a much more progressive and much more interesting thing to think about. I think frictionlessness is going to be key. As we have less and less time, as we're faced with more and more choices, we need to find it easy for people to buy things and make decisions. Within our phones these days, it knows our credit card details, it knows our faces, it knows our fingerprints, it knows our addresses. There's no reason why every single transaction can't now just be as simple as pressing your thumb or holding up your phone and taking a picture of your face. And simplicity is going to be key as well. Like, when we celebrate companies like Allbirds or Warby Parker or Casper, what we're really celebrating is companies that have a very, very simple product proposition and a beautifully, simply designed website, and they make it easy. This is Hotel Tonight. You know, Kayak will show you 36,000 different hotel rooms all around the world for every night of the year. Hotel Tonight will just show you the price of hotels near you that are good enough. And I think that's a great way to think about advertising. We're also going to see the premiumization of advertising as well, I think. As most wealthy people spend more of their time in environments where ads are harder to place because they're streaming on Netflix or they're reading magazines that don't have that much inventory, we're going to increasingly find that the way to reach people with money becomes more expensive. And I think that's a really interesting debate for our industry to have. So in summary, I think we need to go back to basics a little bit. I think we need to be aware of what's changing, aware of what technology makes possible, aware of how people are now starting to behave in different ways, but also remember that our industry is rooted in quite long-term human things that have not changed. Our need to buy brands to express who we are, our need to have trust in the advertising that's delivered to us. And you will note that, generally speaking, the oldest forms of media are the ones that are most trusted. It is print, it is magazines, it is outdoor, it is TV, and it's the newer forms of media which tend to be less trusted. We need to get mobile right. The reality is that most people spend several hours a day on their phone, and yet we've still never developed the right kind of strategy or the right kind of advertising unit to reach people there. So I'd love to see a group of people work on that effectively. I think we need to be aware of the past, but we also need to innovate not just around today, but around what's going to be next. Like, rather than take units from the past and fit them to what we've done before, to the new, we need to actually create entirely new advertising experiences around what is possible. So if you think about it, if you think about the change that the metal paint tube made to painting, that was quite significant. So just imagine what a change us effectively and properly using new technology will mean. Like, we have this amazing toolkit of incredible code and incredible screens. And we also have this incredible canvas, which is the phone, which is the TV, which is the newspaper, which is the magazine. It's an incredibly exciting thing to design for. So while it might appear that life is more complicated than ever, and it appears that change is faster than ever, I think if we take a step back from it and we work around this newly possible, it's actually a really exciting time to work in this industry. So thank you very much.
Tom, that was absolutely fantastic. Love you said it was going to be provocative and all your myth-busting everything. So, Wagga, Wagga.
Is it a
and
good
it's
place?
very sensitive, and some people argue about Wagga or Wagga Wagga. Oh, no, it's bloody brilliant. Anyway, now, just a couple, I'd love to throw stuff to the floor. You talked about sort of the way it's almost like a herd mentality out there. I mean, for people who are starting careers in this sector, do you think there's a herd mentality high up and goes all the way to the top in advertising at the moment?
I do. I think I don't want to be rude, but I'm aware that there's a lot of fear in the industry. Like, it didn't. Maybe I was just a lot more junior, but 10 years ago it felt more fun. Like, it felt like creativity came from being relaxed. It came from breaking rules. And now I'm often in situations where it's less important to do good work. It's more important to show that you made rational decisions along the line that led to work that wasn't particularly good. I've got plenty of clients that basically want to get as much data as possible to show that they weren't stupid. And if that leads to success, great. If it doesn't, they're not really that bothered. So I just wish we could sort of embrace, I don't know, like this more sort of playful attitude. We could get better at accepting that in this culture where people talk about failing fast, people need to really celebrate that failure rather than try and merchandise it later on as being some kind of groovy learning process. Yeah, I mean, I've had lots of companies that want to try new things, and when they don't work out, you then have to create a case study video to show it did work after all. And that seems to sort of miss the point of trying new things.
Yeah, you've got this great concept talking about premiumization, and you mentioned this fuzziness of millennials, a word you don't like, and the importance of the baby boomers. Why aren't we doing more there? And what should we be doing?
Well, it kind of links onto your last question, really. Like, we have a very strong herd mentality where it's very difficult to be different to other people in this industry. So because we've, as an industry, made this assumption that you have to do social media, otherwise you're stupid. You have to spend lots of money on digital, otherwise you feel vulnerable. I think there is this assumption that if you are a luxury car company, you have to start targeting millennials, otherwise you're being thick about the whole thing. And I look, I mean, it's quite cliche to talk about Apple because everyone sort of holds them up as being this example of people doing it right. But if you look at Apple, they don't do social media, they don't do influencer marketing. Their media plan is quite simple. They tend to do very bold, expensive ads that are somewhat sort of wasteful. And I think we need the confidence to find simplicity again in this industry. And that might mean saying no to lots of things. It might mean saying no to reaching urban millennials that watch Vice. It might mean accepting that people who are 60 years old still care about brands, and they're younger people than they used to be, and that they have virtually all of the money in the world, and actually they are more influential than you might realize.
Yeah.
But it takes a certain amount of confidence to suggest things like that, because unless you've got the balls, people just assume you're being really stupid about everything.
I think the simplicity is a great message in this climate at the moment. Can I throw to the floor now? Anybody got a question? We can go so many places. Yes, ma'am. Mic on its way, at speed.
I'm Nicole from OVO Media. We are working on that mobile problem, by the way. But
Good.
my question is, I was in a room yesterday briefing a media strategist, a very young media strategist. I would probably call him millennial. And his face, he just lost interest halfway through the meeting because I kept saying to him, our brand is unknown. We're a startup. We need really high reach. We need as much reach as you can give me for the money that I'm giving you. And he kept saying, let's target. You've got these niche sports. Let's go on to like TV. We'll do TV, but we'll do it in a targeted way. Have you seen any research? Because I know from experience that it won't work if we do it that way. I won't reach enough people. But I can't talk to him with data or research to say to him, what you're saying is idealistic and good and well-intended, and you're trying to be efficient, but it won't work for us.
We're in an interesting time in the industry where we've got like over a century of data really on how advertising performs. So if you look at everything that the Ehrenberg Bass Institute does and Byron Sharp, like he will support your point of view all day long. The one thing that we have to be aware of is we have had this sort of quite significant like inflection point since the internet came along. And we actually haven't had that much data since that point to know the degree to which what we learned before is still relevant, the degree to which it's slightly different, and the degree to which it's totally different. I think we generally need to be quite careful in this industry that we don't aggregate so much data and so many different eventualities that we end up with very generic advice which is actually not applicable to every brand. So that idea that 60% of your budget should be spent on brand building and 40% on performance, like that's a good aggregation of everything. But if you are launching a disruptive sneaker trainer company, you could actually put all of your money into Facebook ads that are all performance marketing, and you could probably make a ton of money doing it that way. Similarly, if you are an insurance company, you probably need to spend all of your money on brand building because it's all about sort of trust. So I think look at the old data, be wary about what is different and what's not, and also be wary about what's specific to your situation. Because often recommendations, it's a bit like scanning every single piece of world-class art that's ever been made and saying the best way to do a painting is to make sure it's 2 foot by 3 foot, that it's portrait, that there's a blue sky and it's got someone's face in it. Like that's a good way to sort of aggregate data, but it's a terrible way to draw a picture.
Another one. Yes, at the back there.
Tom, hi. I'm Janani from Fairfax. I follow you on LinkedIn.
Oh, no.
A week ago, one of your posts was very interesting for me because I work in data. You said, please, can we stop making decisions based on data? And can we start making decisions based on gut instinct and empathy? So it's interesting to hear, your feedback to the question before. So I just want to get a bit more of your views on what you meant in that post.
Yeah, I think especially in sort of strategy and planning, I think people's jobs are a bit more like stand-up comedians, where it's their job to sort of go around the world and observe behavior. And an insight should have something that feels quite remarkable and funny and sort of poignant about it. I think the way that most people, I believe, today should still think about insights is that you use your kind of gut and you take in lots and lots of information that you don't even know that you're taking in, and then you come up with a hypothesis, and then you use data to either ratify that hypothesis or to change it somewhat or to throw it away. And I think we live in this weird environment where somehow we assume that we can outsource the sort of miracle that is strategy and the miracle that is insight generation to data and to machine learning and all that stuff. And we have this horrible expression, which is data-driven insights. And this is a challenge to everyone in the room right now. If you can think of a single data-driven insight, I'd love to hear it, because I've never heard of one. I've heard of a data-driven fact. I've heard of data-supported hypotheses, but I've never, ever seen a data-driven insight in my life. And I think, I mean, it makes me sound like a real hippie, but I think we do need to sort of embrace the wonder of advertising and the uncertainty of advertising and the miraculous nature of it. You know, there are lots and lots of songs that are really good, even though they go against all of the rules about music. There are lots of movies that are great, even though they don't follow the same story arc that they're supposed to. And I think the more that we can rely on ourselves as human beings, the better. Like, if you speak to a world-class cricketer and ask them, like, when they decide to hit a ball, when they decide to leave a ball, they'll be quite embarrassed, because they won't really know how they make that decision. Like, in reality, they are taking in like 1 million different data points of the body language of the bowler and how moist the grass is. And I don't play cricket, so this might be nonsense. But they're taking in lots and lots of data. And because they're so good at what they do, because they're so sort of attuned to all of those variables, they can't explain to you how they make these decisions. It's quite embarrassing to them. And I think we need to be similar in this industry, where if you're really good at marketing, like, you probably are taking in more data than you can explain to each other. And you probably feel like you're feeling your way through it. And actually, you are making data-driven decisions. It's just data that you can't necessarily express. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm really naive, but I'd like to think that if you're really good at marketing, you should just be able to make good decisions, and your gut is very strong. And if you're not that good at marketing, then you'll make bad decisions and get fired, and life will be fine for both people.
I hope you're right on that one. Do we have a last question on the floor? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Ryan. I actually work at Zenith here in Sydney, so it's nice to have you here. My question, I'm really interested in your idea of the future kind of becoming more simple in the way that we interact with brands and that sort of thing. But I think one of the reasons why it doesn't seem like it's going to be more simple is because of pop culture and that sort of stuff. And one of the examples I always think of is Minority Report, when Tom Cruise is walking through and all these out-of-home billboards and that sort of stuff are coming out at him. Is there any sort of pop culture or, you know, non-fiction kind of stuff that you could point us towards that might build a better understanding of what the future might look like and how we might interact with brands moving forward?
Oh, that's a good question. I definitely can't give you a particularly good answer straight away. I know that much. I think we need to be mindful that Minority Report was a dystopian future. And I think quite a lot of people in advertising see that and they go, great. Like, that's what we should be doing. I mean, this sounds very boring and I haven't really thought this through, but it may be that the future's kind of quite similar to today. You know, and I don't mean we'll wear the same clothes and, you know, we'll still own cars. I just mean that a lot about branding is actually very, very primeval human behavior, which is this need to express who you are. And this need to sort of believe in things and to get trust from things. So if you wear, you know, common project sneakers, it's your way to sort of tell a few people around the world you're a bit wanky. If you buy Tide laundry detergent, it's your way to think, I don't really have time to worry about my laundry detergent, this is going to be fine. And all of those dynamics that we have, either to form bonds or to tell people who we are or to distance ourselves away from other people that we don't want to be like, all of those dynamics will be the same in the future. Now, we will have the ability to do things like personalized advertising. We will have the ability to serve more precisely these things. But I still feel that a lot of brand building is actually about wastage, and it's actually about doing things which are deliberately expensive and deliberately sort of over-engineered. So I can imagine that most forms of marketing in 20 years' time will actually be quite similar. There'll be some that are a bit different. Like if you're a hotel chain, you can imagine more of your marketing being about you know, capturing people on Google Maps as they're driving close to your establishment. There will be sort of parts of it which will be different. But I actually think that most sort of central theories of advertising will remain quite similar.
Well, on that note, Tom Goodwin, can I just say you are officially now my favourite madman. I think it's fantastic, your message today. Please join me in thanking Tom Goodwin. Thank you. Terrific.